You're listening to the AID Network.
Hey friends, I'm super excited to announce that starting in 2019, you can join me and a team of 10 other creatives to do the first ever 10-week Circle of Trust training camp. What will happen is we'll meet once per week and tackle an important topic where you'll be able to watch along with a video conference where you can ask questions and make sure you understand how the topic breaks down to your unique career challenge. After each session, you'll receive worksheets if needed and an audio or video recording to listen back to any notes you may have missed the first time. And I'm excited because we have 10 weeks of topics that I know will help any freelancer get into the game or fine-tune the game they're already running. We're going to be looking at topics like managing your work week. How do you make sure that you have the proper amount of time for your clients, but also time to get the work done that you need to? Finding time for you. Going freelance sometimes can mean trading one boss for 10. I want to show you how I was able to find time to grow my business and grow my own talents in the process. One of the most important parts of running a business is setting your goals. It's easy to forget to do it though. As time drags on, you get more and more overwhelmed. How often do you find time to go back and check in with yourself on what are you trying to do here? And last but not least, reverse engineering your dream. I believe big things are accomplished by taking small steps to get there. That's how I've built my career. It's how I've built Adventures in Design and how I hope to help you do the same. To learn more about Circle of Trust Training Camp, visit aid.network/contact, reach out to me, and I'll get back to you with more information. Training camp begins at the end of January. Hurry, now only 8 spots available. I look forward to spending the new year working together to make it the best year possible. Plant a tree with Jack Prince. That's right, environmental friendly printing at awesome pricing. At Jack Prince, being good environmental stewards is more than a throwaway line about initiatives or overuse of the word green. As a company, as people, and as a community, Jack Prince is passionate about leaving the earth better than they found it, and they're confident that you and I feel the same way. Over 343 trees planted so far. So every time you place an order, Jack Prince places a tree. Place an order now and plant a tree and save money while saving the earth by going to jackprince.com/circle of trust. Remember, no shipping, no hidden fees, just great orders and more trees.
Hey, Taste Buds, have you downloaded Keep It Simple Keto, my brand new free ebook? It's your 7-day quick start guide to living a fabulous fat-fueled life without all the BS. I can guarantee you've all heard about keto by now. We all know folks eating low carb, and I'm guessing many of you have even considered trying it out. Head over to tastyyummies.com/keto now to download your free Keep It Simple Keto ebook.
Coming to you live from the Saul Rosenberg Studios, broadcasting worldwide into all ships at sea, here comes another action-packed episode of Adventures in Design.
Good morning and good design on the show today. Beth Manos Brickey with her co-host, Jame Clear. Jame Clear is the author of Atomic Habits, an easy and proven way to build good habits and break bad ones. I'm your host, Mark Brickey. What do you say we get started with today's special Adventures in Design? Hey friends, welcome back. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Adventures in Design. Today's a special one because today's interview is ran by Beth and her special co-host, Jame Clear, the author of Atomic Habits. Jame Clear is my kind of guy. Just feels like a bud right out of the gate. He's the type of person that I can relate to because he does this. He thinks really big, but he knows to accomplish anything big, anything of a large scale, it's going to take tons of small steps to get there. Big change, big careers, big things, they don't happen overnight. There are no overnight success stories. It's always tons of little bits and pieces that you fine-tune to the machine to get to where you need to go. Slow and steady will always win the race. But slow and steady needs constant personal evaluation to make sure all your efforts are leading into the right direction of just chipping away day after day at that dream version of yourself. I'm excited to have both Beth and Connie join the Adventures in Design regular rotation. I'm sure you realize over the last year, if you're a regular listener, that I've been working hard on diversifying the content that we bring to you every day. It's always about someone who somehow figured out a way to design happiness into their life. I love the idea of those that turn the daydream into the day job, or people that can find a profitability in their passion. However, one of my catchphrases you want to say it, that is the core value of AID. So finding different people to learn that story from, different tips to get there, I think that that's the best way to learn. Instead of constantly hearing people that mirror our own life experience. When you hear advice from somebody that's a little bit different than you, it soaks in a different way. And maybe it's not a one-to-one, their situation is just like yours, but their creative resolution to their situation may open up that window in your mind of, wow, that's how I can figure out this thing that I've been banging my head against the wall, just losing sleep over for the last 3 weeks. And as we've come to figure out a way to diversify our content, you'll slowly start to realize that I'm also diversifying the voices that bring you more adventures in good life design. So I'm very excited for this recording. I pop back on like a bull in a podcast china shop at the end, fired up about what James's advice reminded me about my own life and all the areas that I can improve. And I want to say, this is Beth's very first interview she ever ran herself. Bad news is the audio quality isn't exactly what you've come to expect from Adventures in Design. But here's the good news. She's good at running an interview. And audio, that's a lesson that can be fixed. How to run Audacity, how to run your microphones, how to run the levels, that's something that can be fixed. But being good at listening and talking to others, that's something that can't be fixed. You got to just be naturally good at it. And I'm proud of her because she is. Hey, everyone. It's Between Mills on Adventures in Design. Here's Jame Clear and Beth Manos Brickey, one of our new co-hosts.
Hello, James. Thank you so much for being here on the podcast today. I'm so honored to have you as a guest on Between Meals. Before we get started, I have to say major congrats on the success of your book. It's only been out a short time, Atomic Habits. And did you hit the New York Times bestseller list in your first week?
Yeah, it was crazy. Thank you so much. It's good to be talking to you too. And the last few weeks and months have been really crazy for me. So really excited. It's just cool to work on something for so long. You know, I wrote the book for 3 years and I've been writing about habits for 6. And to see it both well received and of course to put all that work in and have, a great outcome like that is just very gratifying. So yeah, thank you.
I can't even imagine the amount of blood, sweat, and tears into something so huge, and being able to see it to fruition and holding it in your hands has to be pretty incredible.
Yeah, there's something about seeing it physically that makes it feel so much more real. I mean, the book has been written for, almost a year now, as far as the text being finalized. But, I've read the document a million times, right? We've revised it dozens of times. I've seen the ebook version. I read the audiobook myself, but it really wasn't until the physical printed book came that it felt like so very real. So kind of cool, especially for me as someone who does most of their work online. It's nice to have something physical living in the world that you made. Just a neat feeling.
I can relate to that because at this point, all of my work is virtual and it's all created online, or it's podcasts or videos or content I'm writing or emails. And I have this dream of one day writing a book. And I feel like we're going to definitely touch on talking about the struggles of writing a book and how that fits into creating habits. But I look forward to the day that I can hold an actual physical thing in my hands.
I mean, the digital part has a ton of advantages too, right? Like you scale and reach, and you have the fluidity of being able to work from anywhere, and there are all kinds of great things about it. But yeah, there's just something special about a physical product.
Yeah, there's nothing like being able to go back and edit when you realize you've made a mistake. That's my favorite part.
Writing a book is that you're like, well, it's in print now. I hope I'm sure about what I'm putting in here. So I asked my publisher for an extra year to do research and writing on top of what I was expecting to do. Wow. And thankfully they gave it to me, but it was mostly born out of that fear of like, all right, this needs to be right the first time. So yeah, there's a little extra pressure there.
That's incredible. So interestingly, I don't know how I've missed your work in all the years that you've been doing your writing. I'm sure I've come across it unknowingly, but the way that you kind of came into my universe recently was, I wouldn't call it happenstance by any stretch of the imagination. I feel like it was like the universe was giving me a bajillion signs, if you believe in like the woo-woo. But I've been doing a lot of work one-on-one with my nutrition and health coaching clients. And what I've been doing and seeing and coming up against time and time again, it isn't the what's on the end of your fork, how are we structuring your meals, what protocols are we taking on? It's the mindset work. It's the shifting their beliefs around themselves and creating new habits. And so I did this entire podcast series about motivation and priorities and small steps. And I was feeling really unsure of even putting it out because there's all these things that I do, and you talk a lot about this in your work and in the book. There's a lot of things that I do, and I've created systems unknowingly. And so I was having a really hard time communicating to people how to take these things that seem like they're so far out there in terms of ideas and take them into practice with small habits and steps. And, we can only speak to our experiences. And I kept saying, like, I don't know. It's not motivation that gets me to the gym 5 to 6 days a week. It's not, I don't look or need to negotiate to make choices to get to the grocery store to cook the meals that are healthy. I just do it because it's part of my life. And so I was kind of reverse engineering my own practices and figuring out what was working and what isn't. And somehow in Googling for research about habits and trying to like find the words to express what I was going through, your work came up and I was like, holy crap, like this guy's nailing it. Like everything that's working for me, he's talking about. Everything I'm struggling with, he's talking about. So you've been in my ear holes now for a couple of weeks, and I've been listening to you at 3/4 speed because every sentence I'm like, yes.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm glad you're finding it useful. I do believe a lot of what you're saying, that like true behavior change is really identity change. Like you're at some point, if you look at yourself as that kind of person, you're not even really pursuing behavior change anymore. Like the goal isn't really to like run a marathon. The goal is to become a runner. Or the goal is really to, like lift a certain amount of weight or make a particular meal or whatever. It's to become the type of person that just does those things normally. Because if that's your identity, if that's how you view yourself, then it becomes much easier to show up and do that on a daily basis. You're not even really like motivating yourself, as you mentioned. You're not trying to like push yourself to be someone else. You're just acting in alignment with who you already believe that you are.
Right.
And I think the good news is that process is happening all the time anyway, right? Like you already have a sense of self. You already have an identity. You already have a self-image. Now, it may not be the most productive version that it could be, or it may not be the one that is at, the ultimate potential you hope to achieve, but you already have that. And so then my question was, well, how does that happen? Like how do we form that? And I think that small habits, and we'll get into this as we talk more, but I think they play a central role in that process. And because they do, and once you understand how habits work, then you kind of have a set of tools that you can use to reshape your identity. And that I think is when it gets like really powerful.
Yeah. And I think for me, it was kind of in reverse engineering what was working and what isn't. I started to realize that what I had inadvertently done is, all the times in my life that I wanted to be the person that went to the gym every day, and all the times in my life I wanted to be the person that was healthier and eating healthier. What I realized in that reverse engineering and really kind of breaking it down is that I stopped focusing on what the results were. So I stopped going to the gym, to your point, to lift this many pounds or to change my body in this specific way. I remember having my very first session with my trainer, and he asked what my goals were. How much weight do you want to lose? And I said, honestly, I don't want to feel like shit, and I want to feel strong and confident in my body. And I don't care what that is and what that looks like. I just want to feel that way. And so it was the first time in my life I was creating new habits without a very tangible, specific, measurable result. And it was really fascinating to hear you talk a lot about that in the book.
Well, that's like kind of the distinction that I try to get to in when I talk about it more in chapter 2 about this difference between outcome-based habits and identity-based habits. Right? Like so often when we start the process of change, we build what I would call an outcome-based habit. I want to lose 40 pounds in 6 months, or I want to double my income next year, or I want to meditate for 15 minutes each day. And it's very results-oriented. And we seem to be wired for that for some reason. That seems to be like our default mode to kind of slide into these results. And I think that inclination is just magnified by our current like social media landscape. We're always seeing people posting pictures of their results and posting images of all that stuff online. It's magnified by the news cycle. Like you're never going to see a news story that's like woman eats salad and chicken for lunch. It's like only going to be a news story like 6 months later when it's like woman loses 75 pounds.
Yeah.
So because we see outcomes all day long on social media, on the news, just in general society and life, I think we start to think the thing that I need are these results. The thing that I need are these outcomes. But actually, I think what we really need is, and what we really crave is kind of similar to what you mentioned to your trainer. We just want to feel different, right? Like what we really want is to feel satisfied, to feel content, to feel confident, to feel like we're fulfilling our potential. And I think that if we acknowledge that, then we can kind of leave the results on the side and kind of set them on the shelf and focus our attention and energy more on becoming a particular type of person, developing a particular type of identity. And when you do that, it's similar, but it results in similar. It delivers similar results, but it shifts the type of habits that you're trying to build.
And the intentions around the habits.
Your outcome is I want to lose 40 pounds in 6 months. Then you start doing all kinds of crazy stuff just to get the scale to drop.
Right.
You go on like some radical cleanse. You pick up some kind of like crash diet. You do like all kinds of things that are difficult to sustain. But if your goal instead is not focused on the outcome, but you're organizing your habits around the identity, well, then you can start to feel like if your identity is, I want to be the type of person who doesn't miss workouts. Well, now anytime you go to the gym, you can feel successful. You can feel good. You can feel like you're reinforcing that identity, regardless of what the result is for that particular workout.
Right.
And that sounds like a little thing on a daily basis, but in the long run, it ends up being really significant because it reinforces being that kind of person and developing that identity. And eventually that's the thing that gets you to show up. It's not the motivation or the willpower or grit or whatever. It's the acknowledgement that like, this is who I am.
Right, right. And so, in talking about this sort of small incremental changes every day and being so important. And I know you talk about this a lot in the book in terms of, the following the tiny curve. Like, can you talk a bit about, because we're so outcome driven and we're so results driven, I think people do lose sight of that 1% every day or just moving forward in the direction of what you're hoping to create identity wise or otherwise. Like, can you talk a bit about the importance of that sort of tiny curve?
Yeah, so I like to refer to habits as the compound interest of self-improvement. And I like that phrase because it's the same way that money multiplies through compound interest. You like save up, you save up some money early on, you're stacking money away for retirement, but it doesn't really feel like much in the beginning. You like don't really have much to show. Your bank account isn't really changing. It's not, you just look at that compound interest curve. It's not until a decade or 2 or 3 later that all of a sudden the returns start to take off. And habits are not exactly like that, but they're similar. The same way that money multiplies through compound interest, the effects of your habits multiply as you repeat them across time. But early on any given day, it's really easy to overlook the significance of that. What is the difference between eating, a salad for lunch today or eating a burger and fries? It's not really that much on any given day. You look at your body, it looks the same in the mirror. The scale is basically the same at the end of the night. But it's only like 2 or 5 or 10 years later, you turn around and you realize how significant those daily choices are, how drastic of a trajectory drastically different of a trajectory they set you on. And, this, I'm sure we'll use a lot of health examples as we talk through this. And that's like kind of my favorite place to go to reinforce some of these concepts. I feel like the gym is such a good metaphor for life. But, it's true for other areas as well. What's the difference between studying Spanish for an hour tonight or not studying at all? Not a whole lot. Like, you probably haven't learned the language either way.
Right.
But it's in fact the habit of showing up and doing it a little bit each day that leads to you learning the language whenever that would be, 6 months from now, 5 years from now, whatever. And all habits work like this. And the challenge is they can compound for you or against you. Habits are like this double-edged sword where they they can either cut you down or build you up. And it's really easy to overlook that like slight 1% improvement or 1% decline, a choice that's slightly better or slightly worse on any given day. And so ultimately, this leads to this phrase that I like, which is that time magnifies the margin between success and failure. It magnifies the margin between a slightly better habit or a slightly worse one.
Right.
And if you have good habits, then time becomes your ally. But if you have bad habits, then time becomes your enemy. And really, if you can get yourself on the right trajectory, even if it's just a 1% improvement, all you got to do is keep showing up and let time work for you. And that's kind of one of the central ideas of the book is how do we build a system where we can like let time work for us rather than against us.
Right. Well, and I think that's, to your point of social media, and you also talk about this in the book, is that people see these before and afters, and in their mind, they see this overnight transformation, this like, wow, last time I saw you, you looked like this and now you look like this. And they don't ever see the time and the effort and the 1% and the days where you don't see the results. And so, that's something that I think people have this shift of it's all or nothing. And so if they're not getting the results they're hoping for immediately, what's the point? What's the point in eating better? What's the point in, not having the junk food when you really want it? Or what's the point in going to the gym when I've been going every day for 4 weeks and is my body really that different? So what can you say to people that when they're stuck in that sort of mental loop where they're sort of like, I'm not getting the results, what's the point?
Right. Yeah, it's a great question. So, I mean, sometimes I refer to this as like the plateau latent potential, this idea that, you're kind of hammering away and doing the work each day, but you don't have anything to show for it yet. And it gets easy to kind of give up on habits at that point. It's like, I've been running for a month. How come I can't see a change in my body? Like I look the same. What's going on here? Why is this even worth it? And a little bit, this comes back to what we were referencing a few minutes ago, which is that the ultimate form of immediate satisfaction is a reinforcement of your desired identity. It's a reinforcement of like, hey, this is the kind of person I am. So yeah, I haven't, I've gone for a run, 3 days a week for a month and I don't see a change in my body, but I'm casting votes for being a runner, for reinforcing that identity. And so now I can go out tomorrow and go for a run. And even if my body doesn't transform, I can still feel successful, because I'm being that kind of person.
Yeah.
But this is something I talk about later in the book and kind of the last half of the book about the importance of habits being satisfying for us to stick with them, for you to develop consistency. And there's a variety of ways to do this. I mean, I just mentioned the ultimate way, this reinforcement of your desired identity, but you can get it from external places as well. And this is sort of an insightful way to this question is maybe provides an insight into how habits work. So you can think of pretty much every behavior as producing multiple outcomes across time. Mm-hmm. So for example, bad habits, often the immediate outcome is favorable, right? Like the immediate outcome of eating a donut is it's sweet and sugary and tasty and, it's enjoyable right now. But the ultimate outcome, if you repeat that habit for a week or a month or a year, is unfavorable and unhealthy and unproductive, and so on. With good habits, it's often the reverse. The immediate outcome of like going to the gym is it requires a little bit of effort and energy and you sweat and it takes work and sacrifice. But then the ultimate outcome a week or a month or a year from now is that you're in shape and it's productive and healthy. And a lot of the battle of building good habits and breaking bad ones is about figuring out ways to take those long-term consequences of your bad habits and pull them into the present moment. Mm-hmm. So you feel a little bit of the pain like right now and you have a reason to avoid it. And taking the long-term rewards of your good habits and pulling those into the present moment so that it feels good right now. And the key factor is really the speed. It's like how quickly you feel successful. Right. And so from a practical standpoint, I think we have a couple options or tactics that we could use to make this process easier and make the process of sticking with habits easier. So the first option is choose habits that deliver more joy or satisfaction to you than the other options. Like not everybody has to work out like a bodybuilder. Like I enjoy strength training, but there are many other ways. You could go kayaking or rock climbing or hiking or do yoga. Like there's a bunch of forms of exercise. So choose the form of that habit that is most satisfying to you. Same way, like if you want to build a habit of reading, well, you could read like nonfiction books or business book, something like Atomic Habits, or you could read Harry Potter or fantasy or novels or, like all kinds of stuff. Right. So if you want to build a habit of reading, choose the form that's most enjoyable to you. And so that's one way to feel a little bit of that pleasure in the moment. The second one is to utilize like an external reinforcer at that time to give you a little bit of pleasure for doing it. So my favorite example of this, it's often challenging to build habits that I would call like habits of avoidance, like don't spend money on Amazon, or don't go out to eat at restaurants and stay home and cook dinner instead, or no alcohol for 30 days, like things like that.
Right.
And the reason that those habits are challenging is that you're just kind of resisting temptation. There is no reward. There's no like satisfaction that comes. You're just like, well, I guess I'm not supposed to drink alcohol, or I'm not supposed to eat out. You know, it just feels like I'm resisting that.
Right.
And so that is inherently unsatisfying. But you can flip that on its head a little bit. So like one of my readers, he and his wife wanted to cook more meals at home and go out to eat less. And so what they did was they set up a savings account and they labeled it Trip to Europe. And then anytime they would stay home and cook a meal, they would, rather than going out to eat, they would transfer $50 over to their account. And they got to see like that, you know, that savings account grow. And then at the end of the year, they put the money towards the trip.
That's brilliant.
And what's nice about that is it's immediately satisfying, right? It gives them a reason to feel good in the moment. And if you feel good now, you'll want to repeat the habit in the future.
Right.
And the hope is that by doing things like choosing the form of the habit you enjoy, or using some of these external reinforcers to feel satisfied, that'll maybe get you through that dip in the beginning where you're kind of waiting for those long-term rewards to accrue, or when you're waiting for that sense of identity to develop. And then if you can do that for a few months, maybe you turn around 6 months or 9 months later and you're like, well, now this is the kind of person I am. Like,
Yeah,
we
it's just what we do.
Yeah. And then it becomes easier to stick with it.
Yeah. No, it's first of all, you just said so much that I'm like, oh my God, where do I stop and say something? Because it's all so good. So to kind of reverse back a little bit to where you were talking about the long-term sort of results versus the immediate pleasure, for lack of a better word. You know, I think that that's something that people, again, you see somebody that's on the other side. So a lot of my friends will look at me and be like, I don't know how you know, because I eat basically a keto approach to eating, and I, you know, paleo-ish, however you want to label it, which I hate to do. They'll be like, but you don't eat grains, and you don't eat processed foods, and you don't eat sugar, and you don't do this. Like, you have such willpower. And I'm like, here's the thing though. It's maybe at some point in the beginning, there was an element like we've talked about with motivation. There may have been a little bit to get started. But what I try to explain to people is that because I was so sick with an autoimmune disease, and I struggled on so many levels with losing weight and dealing with how I was so low energy all the time. And I wasn't the person I wanted to be. And I was sick so often that now it's not a matter of, oh, I do this because I have willpower. It's the long term of, I know the alternative. I know what happens. Sure, if I eat one non-paleo cookie today, is it going to give me a stomach ache? No. Is it going to maybe open the door for more bad choices? At this point, probably not. But what are the long-term effects if I open that door a little bit every day? And on Wednesday, I have this, and on Friday, I have that. And over the weekend, I cheat by doing that. It's like, to me, the long-term effects aren't, you know, they're just not worth it. And so that it becomes less about that willpower and the negotiation. So I think that that's an amazing thought process in terms of, if you're looking at something, is the payoff immediate or is the reward delayed? And then the other thing I want
about opening up the door is a good one too. I mean, this is why I like, I kind of have this mantra for whenever I miss a habit that I've never missed twice.
Yeah,
and
I love that.
The reason that I really like that phrase is that it reinforces this idea that it's not, you don't need to be perfect, right? It's almost never the first mistake that ruins you. It's like this spiral of repeated mistakes that comes afterward. It's this, you know, letting the one slip up turn into a new habit of having a non-paleo cookie every day.
Right.
And so never miss twice, it especially with diet stuff, for whatever reason, we seem to really get into this all or nothing mentality. It happens with a lot of habits, but with diets in particular, where it's like, okay, you started the diet, you're doing it for like you're eating this way for like 6 days or 7 days. And then on the 8th day, your friends want to go to happy hour or you binge eat or something. And then you're like, oh, see, I knew it. I would blow it. You know, like, why bother? I might as well just, you know, I'm not made for this.
Right.
And then we give up. And I think, you know, I had that a lot when I was working on writing. For the first 3 years, I wrote a new article every Monday and Thursday. And if I missed on Monday, well, I wish that hadn't happened. And it'd be easy for me to be like, oh, well, the streak's broke now.
Yep.
But never miss twice. So let me make sure that I get back in on Thursday and pour all of my energy into getting back on track. I think you can do the same thing when you binge eat or go out to happy hour or break your diet or whatever. And, it's like, all right, I wish that hadn't happened, but never miss twice. Let me pour all my attention into making sure the next meal is a healthy one.
Right.
And if you can do that, then you turn around at like the end of the year and that single mistake is just a blip on the screen. It doesn't mean anything, but it's really the key to like making it not mean anything is getting back on track.
Right. And I think specifically too, if we're talking about, diet and habits in that sense, I think the nice thing about that is it removes, because I hate this idea of guilt-free or guilty or it's bad or it's good. I think what that does is it removes the emotion surrounding the incident. It's just, this is the thing I did. And is it in line with the person I want to become or I believe that I am already? No. Is it in line with my goals? No. Was I bad? Was I naughty? Should I feel guilty? Also no. Do I need to make a better choice moving forward so I can stay on track with all of the things I've worked so hard for? The answer is probably yes. And then I think what's beautiful about that is there isn't this moment of shame. And then like you spoke about already, that shame turns into a spiral. And then when you spiral, where do you go? Because now you don't have a system in place to kind of fall back on. It's like you're literally teetering on the edge of a mess at any moment.
I mean, it's almost never productive for us to like ruminate on stuff like that or to assign self-judgment or criticism to those past behaviors. It's just not, it ends up becoming a spiral of rumination rather than being like a fruitful way forward.
Yeah.
And so never miss twice just kind of helps me get my mind out of that and get back to like, what is the next action? Like in that sense, it's kind of useful. Sports and coaches will often talk about that, right? Like you screwed up on the last play, but like we need to move on.
Right.
Like it's time to have a short memory and focus on the next play.
Right.
And so it's kind of like that mentality, but applied to your life. Like, what's the next play here? But I can forget about judging and focus more on making the best play in the next moment.
Yeah, I love that. It's such a great analogy because it's so true. If a sports player of any kind dropped the ball, screwed up, ran to the sideline, and the coach just railed into them the way we often do to ourselves, nothing productive would come of that. And they would step on the field, head down, already in that shame spiral, and probably screw up time and time again. And I think, I often try to teach my clients and, my readers that it should be no different with that self-talk, right? So like if your best friend came to you and said, I screwed up and I ate this thing that wasn't on my quote diet or wasn't in line with this sort of system that I set up for myself, we would say, it's cool. Like, you got it, girl. Like, it's a cookie, move on. But in our head, we would never say that to ourselves because I do believe that we've been trained that the guilt and the shame, like that's where motivation comes from, is you beat yourself up, because if you're not beating yourself up and feeling horrible for your life choices, then you're not doing it right. And it's kind of scary that that's what we've just taught ourselves.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly how that evolved as like the standard narrative, but it seems to be the pervading story throughout society that, you've been told, not you specifically, but in general, we have been told that, if you're overweight, it's your fault. If you're, unhealthy or a drug addict, it's your fault. That you have like all this guilt, shame, blame, lack
laziness,
of willpower, lack of perseverance, lack of grit. You don't want it bad enough. You need to work harder. Like all of that has just been piled on for whatever reason. And that's one of the things I talk about in chapter 7, that in fact, actually the research on self-control does not really show or support that. The people who appear to have the highest amount of self-control, the ones who have better habits or appear to be able to stick to them more than others, that maybe outwardly you would look at them and say, oh, they have such willpower. In fact, what differs is not necessarily their levels of willpower, but the fact that they're in an environment that is primed for good habits, that they are tempted less. And so I think that again, let's try to get out of this like guilt and self-criticism spiral and transfer more of our energy to like, what is the useful or productive action? And the answer here is, well, one of the best ways to increase your willpower, so to speak, is to redesign your environment so that you don't need it as much. And if you do that, then all of a sudden it's like you get this instant boost in grit and perseverance and so on. And similar to how at the very beginning of this conversation, you said you had trouble describing how you did what you did, or you're like, it doesn't feel like I'm fighting or working that hard for it. It's just kind of what I naturally do. In many cases, the people who are at the top of any given field, who are succeeding in any particular domain, they have all kinds of factors working for them, and they've been working for them for so long, or they're so normal that they seem invisible to them at this point.
Right.
And so they have trouble saying, in many cases, people will describe themselves as saying, oh, I must have really good willpower. I have, great perseverance and so on. But if you really look at what's going on in the environment, almost always the environment is designed favorably for them. And the rest of us can use that to our advantage, right? We can design an environment that serves us rather than one that hinders us.
Yeah, no, I love that. And you talked about it a lot in the book. And it was kind of, again, I sort of paused and was looking at the areas where I felt successful in my habits and my systems. And I was like, oh, I did set up an environment. Like, I mean, on a very basic, of course, level, like I don't keep the foods in the house that I don't want to eat, because if they're here, I'm tempted. And then it sort of tests the habits and the systems that I've put into place. So I've created an environment at home, or there's certain supplements I know I need to take every day. And I used to just rely on my memory to take them. And now I know that if I need to take them post first meal, I put them right next to the fridge, because I have a whole system where I make my breakfast. And after my breakfast, I fill my water up for the day. Right next to where the water is in the fridge are my supplements next to the fridge, or my CBD oil next to my toothbrush, so that right before bed, I remember. And so I think, it's all these things, again, to your point, you don't know that you've even created that. And sometimes you do. I think there's definitely times I've intentionally done it. Other times
Sure.
You just do it because it works with it. What would you say to people where, all of that is like, okay, yes, that makes sense. I'm going to do my best. What about when you can't control the environment? So maybe your spouse or your partner or your children aren't on board yet or ever to change the way that they're eating, or your work environment is donuts every Friday and bagels every Monday. Like, how can you use the environment to your advantage when it's kind of working at your disadvantage?
Yeah, that's a good question. So first of all those examples you just gave are really good ones. And I think it'd be easy for someone to hear some of those, like, oh, my supplements are in this area and my CBD oils next to the toothbrush and so on, and be like, oh, that seems like such a minor thing. Like, why would that make a big difference? But the point is, imagine living or working in an environment where you have 100 of those little things working for you, right? And like no one change. And I say this in the book, like the holy grail of habit change is not a single 1% improvement. It's like 1,000 of them.
Right.
And so no one change is going to transform your life. But man, if you do these like little easy things each day, and then all of a sudden you turn around, you have this like really powerful system working for you, just kind of almost carrying you along rather than you having to force it. Now, the factors that you just mentioned, when the environment is working against you rather than for you, I would like to divide them into two categories. So we have both physical environment, like walking into the common room at work and having bagels and cookies and donuts and all that on there. And then we also have the social environment, which is like, my spouse wants to do something different than I do, or my friends are pulling me in one direction, I want to go in the other, or so on.
Right.
And for the physical environment, I'm not going to say it's easy, but the change is a little simpler in the sense that you can either, avoid going into the common room, bring your lunch to work, or add a little like mini refrigerator by your desk or whatever, like restructure the environment so you don't have to come across those temptations. If you're at home or you have an apartment and say you have roommates and like you don't have total control over the physical environment, then you can do one of two things, which can be useful. So the first one is, you can just select a new environment for the habit you're trying to build. So let's say, for example, that you're trying to build the habit of journaling, and you come home each night, which is when you want to journal after work, and your roommate is always watching Netflix or something, and you share this room, and it's just hard for you to do it there with the TV on. Well, you could develop a new habit in a new space and say, all right, after I leave work, I'm going to go to this coffee shop that I've never gone to before. And this will be the journaling coffee shop. And I'll walk in, I'll turn my phone off, and I'll do my journaling there. And the point with that strategy is it's kind of, there's like a higher level thing that's going on with habits, which is every habit is tied or associated with a particular context. And in a sense, habits are like all about associations, it's really what you associate with a context or a cue that determines the habit that comes out, So like you could, for one person, they could walk into their living room and the couch could be the place where they associate the habit of watching Netflix for an hour. For another person, the couch could be the place where they associate the habit of reading for an hour. And it's the same couch, but it's just like, it depends on what kind of memory or habit you have tied to that context. And the challenge of trying to build a new habit in an old context and an old environment is that you're battling all these old cues that you have, so like you walk in and you're like, oh, this is the place where I watch Netflix and eat ice cream for an hour. And that's like kind of in the back of your head. And now suddenly you're trying to read or journal or, make a healthy salad or something like that. And so it's like implicitly, subconsciously, you're fighting all these old associations. And there are a variety of things you could do. I already mentioned going to a new environment, like a coffee shop or something like that. You could also change the environment a little bit. Sometimes it could be just as simple as like rearranging your furniture or rearranging the way the room is laid out and then trying to like learn new patterns with that. Like, for example, a lot of people feel like they watch too much TV, but if you walk into pretty much any living room, where do all the couches and chairs face?
It's the center of the room.
Television. So it's like, what is this room designed to get you to do?
Yeah.
And you could move a chair so it doesn't face the TV. You could put the television inside like a cabinet or wall unit so that you're less likely to see it. You could take the remote control and put it inside a drawer in the coffee table or something. But you could also increase the friction associated with the task. And so, you could like unplug the TV after each use and then only plug it in if you can say the name of the show that you want to watch. So you're not allowed to just like mindlessly turn on Netflix and find something. Or you could, if you really wanted to be extreme, you could take the TV off the wall and put it in the closet and then only set it up when you really wanted to watch something bad enough.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think you're getting my point here on the physical environment, which is it's easier to build habits in a new physical space where you don't have old habits associated with them. And if you have to be in the same space, reducing exposure to those cues or increasing the friction of the task, like putting more steps between you and the bad behavior and fewer steps between you and the good one, that's a good way to overcome that. Yeah. But the second part of your question was more complicated, which is the social environment.
Right.
And this is something that I think we all know, we all feel, which is that humans are wired to want to belong. Our ancestors lived in tribes, and if they got cast out from the tribe, if they didn't belong, if they didn't have the support of the people around them, that was a death sentence. And so the ones who survived were the ones that cared about the opinions and respect and approval of the rest of the tribe, those around us. And as a result, we've all kind of been wired to care about the opinions of others, because when others think highly of us, when they like us, when they respect us, it benefits us. And we all know or have heard phrases like, oh, just don't care about what other people think, or, don't put that much weight into their opinions and so on. But the fact remains that it's kind of our default. We're kind of wired for that.
Yeah.
And of course, those phrases have some truth to them, because we can take that too far, right, and take it to an unhealthy degree. But we're all wired to care about what others think of us. And so because that's true, the question to ask is not how can you not care what others think, but how can you use that to your advantage rather than to your detriment? And I think the key answer or the key takeaway is you want to join groups, join tribes where the desired behavior is the normal behavior. Because if your desired behavior is normal there, then you'll have a reason to stick with it, because doing the habit actually will help you belong. You see this happen all the time. Like people will join like a CrossFit gym, and all of a sudden they turn around a couple months later and they're eating paleo, and they have a certain brand of knee sleeves, and they've got a particular workout shoe. And like, they didn't go in wanting to do those behaviors.
They probably didn't even go in wanting to make friends, but that's what they do.
But like, everybody else is wearing those shoes, so maybe I should buy them too. And everybody else is eating paleo, so guess this is what the restaurant we're going to go to, and so on. And when you develop friends who have those kind of habits, you start to soak them up naturally. Now, this becomes more challenging when you talk about things like, well, my partner doesn't want to do this, or my son doesn't want to eat that way, or whatever. But If you're thinking about your own behavior, and there's kind of two components here, like, do I want to change my habits, or am I trying to change the habits of the other members of my family? If you're trying to change yours, then my recommendation would be, in many cases, it's not reasonable to fire your friends or get rid of your family, but you can give yourself an hour or two a day where you're away from them and where you're part of a new tribe where that is the normal behavior. So maybe that means joining a new gym or a different book club or finding community in some place where that habit can have like a sacred space to live, where it's not being criticized or torn down by the other people who seem to have competing goals. So that's kind of a huge factor. And then for changing the behavior of others, if you're trying to get like your kids to change their habits, for example, this is a really complicated and dicey issue. Like on the one hand, people will say things like, well, don't try to change other people. You can't change them, so on. But that's true to a certain degree. And I think that it is healthy to not want to like control everybody that's around you. But it's also true that all of us influence the behavior of others.
Absolutely.
We just talked about how the people who are at your CrossFit gym might influence your eating habits. And so the same is true for parents and friends and so on. Like, you do influence the habits of those that are around you. And I think that that for parents in particular, one of the most effective levers to pull is not by trying to change the habits of your children yourself, but by putting them around peers who have the kind of habits that they want. Because kids are early on, when they're like 2, 3, whatever, they're master imitators. And every parent knows this, right? You like curse once and your kid says the word over and over again. But as they age, kids imitate their parents less and less and imitate their peers more and more. And so you can't stop that process from happening. But as a parent, you are in control of what city you live in or what schools they go to, what sports they're a part of, what extracurriculars they belong to, and so on. And again, you can't force them to be friends with anyone. But like one example I always think of, early when I was younger, my parents put us on the swim team. And man, if you go to pretty much any college swim team in America, they all have good grades. It's crazy how many of the swimmers are smart. And I don't know why that is or what goes on with that sport. But if you want your kids to be around people who have good study habits, well, that's kind of like one backdoor way to do it. Right? Like cross country, same thing, great grades there. They're just like certain, I don't know why, but certain sports seem to like lean that way. And that doesn't mean you're going to make your kid a genius, but that's the general strategy is like, how can we put them in environments where they're more likely to soak up these habits that we're looking for them to build? And of course, parenting and instruction plays a role as well. But I think that that's a good way to work with the tendency of children to imitate their peers and not just try to say something like, you need to act different or don't do what your friends do or whatever.
Right. Yeah. And it seems like the younger they are, the more you have control specifically around the environment and the people they're exposed to and the community that you build. And then as they get older, if they kind of have that as a foundation, they kind of have it, it's where you were talking about having to change your environment and to change cues that are working against you. For them, as they get older, they'll be working to sort of butt up against these positive cues that have already been created for them without them knowing. And so hopefully, like to your point, they'll just start to make choices that are in alignment with the person they believe that they are, because you as a parent did your job creating that, at least on the best that you can.
I think that's true. And at some point kids become adults and then they're doing the things that we're talking about here, right? We're all talking about shaping our own habits as well. So it's a never ending process. But you're just trying to equip them as best you can for, they turn around and they're 25 or 30 and they're like, oh, I inherited a lot of these habits from my childhood. Now, which ones still serve me and which ones do I need to adjust and so on. So it's a lifelong process for all of us, but
and we all go.
The parent can play maybe a more significant role in shaping that.
Yeah. And then no matter what you do, kids will be I mean, I'm looking at my own life and specific is that my mom, I was sick so much as a child that my mom really created an environment for us where we were not allowed to just go into the cabinets and there weren't sugary cereals and cookies, like treats were not a thing. My mom knew that sugar was a trigger for me. And so maybe to a detriment, the strictness of the environment was working for me in so many ways and keeping me healthy. But the very first thing I did when I got one of my very first babysitting jobs, it's like kind of humorous. The first family I worked for owned a vending machine company, and in their basement it was boxes and boxes and boxes of every garbage candy bar and like Cheetos. And they would tell me, oh, just help yourself, take whatever you want. Well, that could be the dumbest thing you could tell a kid who has been restricted sugar for her whole life. Because what did I do? I brought my little backpack there. I shoved every whatchamacallit and Cheeto. I mean, everything you could think of, I would put in there. And then, you know, I was probably 14, 15 and I ate and I ate and I ate and I gained weight. And then I was like, why am I getting fat? Like, what's happening? And it really wasn't until much, much later in my life that as roles reversed and I started to create these habits for myself around my health that I was like, oh, like maybe there should have been a level of moderation or medium in that. But I realize now that so many of the habits that work for me in my health and my nutrition are just instilled in me in a base level where I don't have to. My parents cook dinner every night. Like I don't have to find new habits. Whereas my husband, he grew up in the South. He grew up in Kentucky. Like it was normal for Little Debbie's to be eaten for breakfast and for dinner to be something out of a box. And those are his comforts and that's his default. And so he has to work so much harder than I do. And so, you know, to your point, there was definitely a time where I did what I did. And as a child, went the extreme opposite of what my parents set in for me. But I realize now as an adult what an incredible gift they gave me, because I feel like those are areas I struggle so much less than the average person. Yeah. So,
and that's hard as a parent, right? Like your mom probably turned around and was like, oh, what did I do wrong, you know, for this period? But it's like, you do the best you can, and every parent is going to screw up to some degree, you know, and like it turns out that actually she wasn't doing something wrong. She was like giving you this great gift. It's just there was this period where it didn't seem like that.
Well, and I was going to do what I was going to do because I was a shitty 15-year-old kid that just wanted to be like argumentative and opposite of my parents. I think I saw Rob Wolf speak at a conference earlier this year, and someone raised their hand and asked the question of like, okay, you know all this stuff and you try to feed your kids so well and you try to set these examples and these habits and these systems for them at home. Like, what do you do when they go to birthday parties and people are eating hot dogs and chocolate cake and all this junk? He's like, I let them eat it because I know that at the end of the day, one, they're not going to feel good and they're going to know that why we eat at home there's a purpose for it. And two, to your point of what we said earlier, like you're not going to undo with that one meal or that one thing, like that chocolate cake for the kids, unless they have a gluten allergy or some sort of peanut, you know, like taking out the extremes, like it's not going to undo all the systems and the habits and the things that they've created at home that become the foundation. And it just literally can't ruin it.
You know, that's actually a good lesson for habits in general, because sometimes people will, I'll be talking about these concepts and people will ask something like, you know, well, what do you do when you travel? You know, like, how do you stick with workout habits then? Or like, what about, you know, when my kids get sick, or like, you know, there's always some emergency, like takes me off course or whatever. And it comes back a little bit to that never miss twice strategy that we talked about earlier. But my response is usually like, you know what, I actually don't worry that much about like when I'm traveling. Now, of course, if you have a job, if you're a consultant and you're on the road every week from Monday to Thursday,
right,
different thing, we need to plan for that. But my point is that people spend a lot of time thinking about edge cases like birthday parties or things that account for like 5 or 10% of the time.
Right.
But instead, we should be much more focused on like, what are you doing during the 90% of the time that you do have control? Mm-hmm. What are you doing during, you know, most of the meals when you're not at a birthday party, or doing for your workouts when you're not on the road traveling? And if you can get that stuff handled, then often the other things just don't matter that much. They're a blip on the screen. Or if you can get that stuff handled, sometimes you learn so much that you figure out ways to make it happen on the road as well, because now you've like, you know, got it dialed in at home and you can see things a little more clearly. But anyway, I think those are good points that you're making.
So I have a question for you, since you're the king of habits, we'll call you. I mean, you know so much about it. And so clearly I'm sure there's areas in your life where you've implemented habits, and sort of to my point where it's almost second nature and you don't even really think about it. Is there an area in your life where you've maybe struggled with implementing habits, and that maybe you really kind of sort of butt up against yourself and knowing as much as you do, but still looking at it and being like, why can't I do this?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there have been a ton. I think people might be surprised at how unstructured I am, given how much I talk about structure and habits. Yeah. But partially I do that because partially I think habits a lot of times people are like, oh, well, no, I don't want to build all these habits. You know, then I'll feel like I'm pigeonholing myself into a particular lifestyle, or I'm robotic or not spontaneous or whatever. But my thing is habits don't restrict freedom, they create it.
Yeah.
You know, like it's like if you don't have your health habits dialed in, you don't have your eating habits dialed in, then you feel like, oh, I never have enough energy. Or you don't have your finance habits handled, then you feel like, oh, I'm always worried about the next dollar, or like when the bills are going to come or whatever.
Yeah.
And so in a sense, it's the people who get their habits handled that actually have the space to do all kinds of free thinking and creativity and so on. So my point there is just that I focus on a few core habits that I really try to get managed, and then I don't worry that much about the rest of the stuff. I kind of go with the flow a little bit more. But for sure, one that I've struggled with a lot, and I've mentioned this on a couple interviews now when people have asked me it, so now I feel like I have this pressure to figure this out. But it's not a sleep habit. Sleeping is fine for me. When I'm out, I'm out. I usually sleep like 8 to 9 hours a night, especially when I'm training heavy. So like that's fine. The problem is the power down habit that precedes it. So it's whether or not I shut down and get in bed at 10 or 10:30 or whatever, or do I stay up and continue to work for another hour or two, and then all of a sudden I turn around, it's like midnight or 1, and I haven't gotten to bed yet.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, that one seems to be a persistent one for me that has been a challenge. And so I'm starting to think about solutions for it. One that I haven't done yet, but I like this idea. My friend Nir Eyal, he also wrote a book about habits called Hooked. But anyway, he bought this thing called an outlet timer, and it's just it costs like $10. You plug it into your outlet, and you can set it to turn off the power from that outlet at a particular time.
Oh, wow.
And you plug the device into it. So what he did was he plugged his internet router into it, and then he killed the power from that outlet at 10 p.m. every night. So internet goes off, can't watch Netflix, can't browse the web. It's time to go to bed. And stuff I really like solutions like that automate your behavior for you and kind of like put you in a better position. Again, we talked about this earlier. Do you need more willpower in that case? Like, is Nir someone with really high willpower if he goes to bed every night at 10? And like from outwardly, when you look at that and you hear, oh, you always go to bed at the same time every night, you must have great willpower. But inwardly, you hear about the system and you're like, oh, well, actually, he's being like nudged in that direction and making it easier on himself, which I think is the smarter approach for behavior change. So anyway, maybe solutions like that could help like keep me in line a little bit more there.
Yeah, I recently discovered in the new iOS on the iPhone, that screen time app. I don't know if you've discovered that. Yeah. Oh my God, it's literally changed my life. And all of this has been going on.
It's a little disturbing to see how much time.
Not only that, but I like shut it down at 8 p.m. now, and I don't allow myself back onto social media till 7 a.m. And I've been talking about this a lot on my podcast, and literally no joke, like your book came out right like on my birthday. So now I feel like we're kindred spirits, me and your book, because we share the same birthday. But your book came out, and I've been doing all this discussion and talking about habits. And then this app came out, and it's like there's all these areas that I've had to look at with success and sort of see how I can mirror that in the areas where I struggle. And for me, there's a couple areas, but social media was one where I'm like, it's just mindless. My thumb opens it, and next thing you know, I'm scrolling and I'm wasting all this time. So I, to your point, I think having something that's external that can kind of keep you in line is, I think people probably look at it like, I can't believe I have to utilize this external tool. But I think if it gets you to your goals or to be the person you're hoping to be, then what does it matter where it's coming from?
Yeah, I feel like that's only something people say early on in the process. Like we use external tools we use a washer to wash our clothes. We use a dryer to dry them. We use a car to get around town. Like we used to do all these things on foot and by hand. And, more technology will just creep in more and more.
Yeah.
But as we can put it to work for us rather than against us, then it becomes like really powerful.
Yeah.
Two things I've done on that social media front that have helped me, in addition to the ones that you mentioned. There are a couple apps. One's called Distraction Free YouTube, and it allows you to watch YouTube videos, but it blocks the suggested videos feed in the sidebar. You just watch the one you're looking at, and then you don't get in the spiral of watching a bunch of others. And then the other one is called Newsfeed Eradicator for Facebook. And you can log into Facebook. You can go to your profile or check your friends' profiles. You can post something if you want, but it blocks the entire newsfeed, so you don't see anything there. So you're not going to click on links or whatever. And both of those are Chrome extensions, but they allow me to, because sometimes I need to watch a YouTube video for an article I'm writing, or sometimes I need to post something on Facebook or whatever. But it allows me to use it, but in a moderated fashion that I would never be able to replicate if it was just up to me to just don't click on anything.
Yeah.
So that one's been helpful. And then the second one is I have started leaving my phone in another room until lunch each day.
Yeah.
And that doesn't work for everyone's job, but if you can pull it off, it's so helpful. Like there are so many times, what's interesting to me, and actually this is a little bit similar to a lot of eating habits and diet habits, which is that they're just a product of convenience. So if I have the phone next to me and it's sitting on the desk right next to me, I'll pick it up and look at it if it's there, just because it's there. Like I'm like everybody else, I'll look at it every 3 minutes. But if it's in another room, I have a home office, so it's like, just down the stairs, whatever. It's like 45 seconds away. I'll never go down to get it. And so the question that I have for myself is like, well, did I want it or not? Like in a sense, I wanted it enough to check it 100 times throughout the morning, but I never wanted it bad enough to work 45 seconds to get it.
Yep.
And I think that you'll find that a lot of your habits, and as I mentioned, diet habits as well, are just like that. They're a product of how much convenience there is in your life. You wonder, why do people eat fast food so much? Well, it's because you can't drive 5 minutes down the road without passing 6 different fast food restaurants.
Yep.
They're just hyper convenient.
And you don't have to get out of your car. I mean,
and so if you can change your environment, whether it's leaving your phone in another room or a variety of things like that make it less convenient to do the undesired behavior, then you often find yourself sticking with the good things.
Yeah.
So anyway.
I love that. And you talk about it a lot in the book, that creating friction, which I think is great, because I think I do it often with my phone and other things where I just set up a situation where I'm like, if I have to swipe 4 screens over to get to Instagram, then I feel like it's probably more steps than I need. And if I quit before the 4th screen, it's probably not that important. Just finding the time. All right, James, I know that you've got a very busy day and I don't want to take up too much of your time and I want to be respectful, but I do ask if you could give me a couple more minutes at the end of every episode. I like to play a little game with all of my guests that we call Would You Rather. And I just give you a couple of questions. It's just one or the other, and pick just as quickly as you can so it's not too much thought. So the first one, would you rather never be able to work out again or never be able to write again?
Oh, God. Never be able to write.
Wow. That's not what I thought you were going to say. I'm really surprised.
Here's the thing, though. Humans, every human has a body. And so to be alive means that you need to move your body. Yeah. And so I feel like if I lost that, oh, man.
Well, you've also got an incredible amount of work that you've created already. So I feel like you could just resurface an article a day for 2 years and still people would be like, wow, I've never heard that.
Man, you chose the most painful one to start.
Oh, sorry. All right. This is my goal with this. All right. Would you rather have to write one book every single year or speak live in front of people every single day?
Ooh, I would rather write one book every year.
Wow.
It would be way more painful. But it would be, the net result of that would be an incredible body of work.
Yeah, so that's a good way of looking at it.
That terrifies me because I'm like, man, this one took me like 3 years, and really it was like 6 if you include everything. So doing one every year would be a brutal pace. But yeah, I'll say write a book a year. I feel like the output would be better. I
have to say, I think in the book you mentioned it, and I think I listened to an interview with you recently where you mentioned how hard it was for you to write the book and what a struggle it was, and I was so happy to hear that, because as somebody that writes all the time and has all these systems in place to create content similar to you in your newsletter and your articles, I feel like I'm working on a personalized nutrition program right now, and it's going to be huge. And every time I sit down to do it, it's so daunting and overwhelming. And it's like, I don't have systems in place for it. And I want it to be so perfect that it's too much. And so you're probably one of the first people I ever heard talk about a book in a way like, that was hard. That was really hard. Mm-hmm. So I appreciate you just
described, like I went through all those stages and felt exactly that. Like I can remember feeling overwhelmed by the scope of the project.
Yeah.
Like when I write an article, it's like 2,000 words. I can see it end to end. When I started writing the book, I could never conceptualize the whole arc of it in my head. It took probably a year before I could get my mind around it and be like, all right, this is what the thing's going to look like.
Yeah.
And that was really overwhelming. And then of course the perfectionism thing where it just spirals out of control and you feel like, okay, this has to be the definitive book on habits. And if it's not, then it's useless. And
it was so helpful to hear that, because the book is so incredible. And you can, as we talked about at the very start, it's like this incredible tangible thing you can hold in your hands. But it's just nice to hear that at the beginning it seemed impossible, because that's kind of where I'm at right now.
I hear you. Just keep showing up. You'll get through it.
Well, your book's been helpful because I'm finding new ways to find new habits to create this environment to write the stuff I want to write that's so much harder than the normal stuff I do. So, all right. Would you rather have to repeat the exact same day over and over and over, like Groundhog Day style, or never, ever, ever be able to establish any sort of daily routine? So every single day was 1,000% different than the day before. Your eyes just bugged out of your head.
Oh man. Okay. I'll say the second. I'll say a different day every day, but my caveat is I wonder if your brain could actually handle that.
Yeah.
Because in a sense, the purpose of the human brain is to remember your past experiences and then map them onto your current circumstances so that you can better predict how to act. So imagine how much uncertainty and maybe even like fear and stress you would have if you never knew what to expect out of the next moment. Like, we are not wired for that.
Yeah, fear is actually the perfect word, because it's like even just going to a social situation where you don't know anybody, you don't know who's going to be there. There is always an element of fear of like, what am I walking into? So if every day was like that, yeah, you're right. Terrifying. All right, last question. Would you rather have a rewind button on your life or a pause button on your life?
Oh, pause for sure.
Wow, that was your quickest one.
Yeah, definitely pause though. Man, there haven't been that many, but there have been some moments for me where it happens so rarely, but when you realize you're in a great moment at the moment, like when it's great, you're in the middle of like an amazing dinner, or you're having a really fantastic conversation, or very rarely you're in the middle of like a sports performance or a musical performance or writing or whatever, and you're like in peak flow. If you could pause that for a second, just like capture that for longer, oh, that would feel so great.
I know. My husband laughs at me because anytime we go somewhere or travel somewhere or do something that like brings me an immense amount of joy, the first thing that comes out of my mouth is, we need to do this more often. He's like, we're just enjoy it right now. Why are you worried that we're not doing it enough and you want to do it again? I'm like, because it's so good. I'm already sad it's over. He's like, it's not over yet though. Like, stop worrying about like
literally happening right now.
Yeah, but I think it's that exact feeling and sentiment of like, how do I stop? Like, I have to say, to kind of wrap it up, talking about the sort of social media and the phone thing, I took all day Saturday and all day Sunday of this weekend off completely from Instagram, which is my social media vice. I took the entire weekend off because I needed a break. It's like, it's important for my job that I'm present there. Things don't flow if I'm not there. But I said to my husband, I was like, I don't know if I felt time slow down the way that it slowed down this weekend in a very long time, because I wasn't just wasting time away scrolling and swiping. And it just was like the slowest I've been able to make time go in a very long time. So it was really nice.
No, that's great.
Well, I know you have a busy schedule. I sincerely appreciate you doing this. I can't tell, like, this is what your book looks like. It's like loaded with Post-it notes and highlighter. And this is the one I told you when I was messaging you. I've been listening to the audio book so I can listen on 3/4 speed. And I just told my husband, like, I have to go buy the book because now I'm so obsessed that I need to be able to have like a tangible reference in my hands. And we talked all about it. We talked about your book, and like, 2 days later, I walk into his office and this book's on his desk. I was like, did you buy that for me? He goes, no, what are you talking about? I was like, where'd you get that book from? He's like, oh, the publisher sent it to me. The publisher sends me books all the time. And I was like, you know that's the book I've been like obsessing over, right? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, I'm taking that, right? Like, you could go buy a second one, but I need that right now. I was like, how I love the the synchronicity of it all. I'm like, how is that just? And he hates reading. Like, he hates to read physical books. So I'm like, why do you have a book on your desk? And why is it the book I've been talking about for like 2 weeks? I don't understand what's happening.
Oh, that's so great. Well, I'm very, very pleased that you're enjoying it so much and finding it so useful.
That's great.
And thank you again for having me on to talk about it. It's just a pleasure.
Thank you. My pleasure as well. If If you want more from Jame Clear, be sure to grab his New York Times best-selling book, Atomic Habits, an easy and proven way to build good habits and break bad ones. Atomic Habits will truly reshape the way you think about progress, the way you view the tiny changes, and it will help you to live your best life by giving you the tools and techniques you need to transform your habits. Head to jamesclear.com/atomic-habits, where you can not only find out where to grab a copy of the book, but you can also get a bunch of amazing free bonuses. And I cannot recommend enough that you head to the homepage of jamesclear.com to sign up for his amazing and insightful newsletter. This website and the newsletter are home to James's life work, where he writes all about habits and human potential, helping us all to answer the question, how can we live better?
Beth, I'm creating a new habit.
Oh, no.
Every time I ask a question, I do 10 push-ups. This is going to be the only question I have for you.
Because you can only do 10 push-ups?
That's it. I'm done. After this, we got to stop this today. Seemed like you really enjoyed that interview.
It was amazing. I loved it.
Yeah, what a great guy to talk to, and just really so dialed into all of his mindset and his life practice and how he's putting everything together. Like that, when you're doing a podcast, you know, it's fun to talk to your friends because you never know where it's going to go, and it can get wild and it can get fun. But when you talk to somebody who's literally an expert and they have the ideas right on the tip of their tongue, and you can throw anything at them and they're like, oh, that reminds me of this. It's always a fun day at the office.
So well versed in habit formation and behavior change. Like I literally nerded out with this one in the sense of just him saying yes. I was so geeked out and excited and fangirling, and then listening back to it to edit it, I was fangirling. And I've been getting his newsletters and I've read his book and I'm in it for the second time. Like I am so obsessed with the work that he is doing.
Yeah, it was great listening to him. And I think that what most of us do when we listen to something like that is we're taking everything that is said and we're doing a litmus test on us.
Yeah.
Do I do this? Do I not do this?
That's his whole book was like that for me.
Yeah. And one of the things that, that I thought about when he talked about environment and habits. And I think that, over the years, I've had a lot of different co-hosts that I've done the podcast with. But I think one of the big differences between me and, say, some of the people that I started the show with is that when I hit record, that is in my mind that I'm going to a space, which is entertaining. I'm going into doing the show. And when I hit record, it doesn't matter what my problems are or how tired I am or how my stomach hurts. So when I hit record, I elevate myself to a level of excitement and to a level of whatever comes at me, I can handle, I can manage it. And people all the time are just amazed when we do interviews face to face, because I'll be like, yeah, blah, blah, how's your day, blah, blah. And then I hit record and I just flip the switch. And so when he was talking about sort of environmental habits, that really, really rang out to me a lot, because I know that for the things that matter the most to me, I know like this is a place where this behavior is the way that you do it. And I immediately go to that maximum level of entertainment or energy and drive myself to get there.
Yeah, it's like a level of expectation that you set for yourself.
Right.
Like I look at my life and the things I've set in motion, or the habits I've created and formed and behavior changes I've implemented. And it's like, there are so many places where I look and it's easy for me to get to the gym because it's part of my Monday through Friday. It's a part of the environment I've created for my work. And, to the point of when I'm traveling, it's no different for me to work out when I travel, but it is more of a challenge for me because it's not the environment I'm used to. It's not the routine I'm used to. I'm used to getting up, walking to the gym, going to the gym, working out, walking home, kind of doing a little bit of work and thought process on my walk home, and getting home and creating my day. And it's a routine, but it's also a level of expectation of what I've set in place.
Well, you know me, I'm an absolute workhorse.
Yes.
Get to my desk and I can grind 16 hours. That being said, when I'm on the road, like today, I have my back to the window because I don't want to know that Mexico's out these sliding doors.
Yeah, I hear you.
And finding time today to sit down and do Monday's episode, it's like one thing I did last night. You said, why are you doing that? I completely built out this desk. I put all my extension cords in. I plugged all my equipment in because I knew that today I needed to work. I hate working on Sundays and I hate working on the road. Yeah. But I knew that if the environment was already built, all I would have to do is sit in the chair. I sat in this chair earlier today. I literally didn't get out of it after 3.5 hours.
Yeah, I know you didn't. I was at the pool.
But, I think that one of the things that really resonated with me on this book, and he kept talking about, a bunch of little changes add up, And then, you become sort of the sum of all your parts.
Yeah, the identity, your desired identity.
And when you hit your 40s, you've created lots and lots of little habits. And now you're really starting to feel the effects of financial, health, career, happiness, who you've got relationships with, the family that you keep, the friends that you keep. Like when you're in your 40s, it's all of a sudden, all the little things that were easy, all the little things that were hard, whichever way you built yourself, it really starts to catch up with you.
Yep.
And I found that the last 4 years, happy birthday me, Saturday, there was a depression when I turned 40, but the last 4 years have been the most full 4 years of my life of complete self-evaluation because I'm starting to feel the success and the failures of all the little habits I've let stack for the last 30 years of being an adult.
Yeah. I mean, it's what he says time and time again, that habits are the compound interest of self-improvement. And I mean, it's such an incredible and brilliant way of putting it out there because you're right. Like it's exactly what he said about if you eat that hamburger and French fries and milkshake today, like maybe you feel great, maybe you won't feel great, but you don't really see the effects of that until you continuously do it and you do it and you do it. And it's the same as eating the salad every day or choosing the healthful green smoothie over the donuts. Like you don't see it today. Tomorrow, you're not going to wake up and be down 4 pant sizes, feel better than ever, and have more energy than you've ever had. I mean, that's the struggle doing the work that I do with clients is they come to me, say we have 6 weeks together or 3 months together, and we start to implement these changes. Like I often wonder when I should do like an exit review with people and have them review their stuff because I often wonder if they feel disappointed that they haven't gotten the quote results that they were hoping for. But you cannot change 10 years of, I'll say quote bad habits because I hate the like implications. That's not a word. Implications. Wow. I've got Mexico brain right now.
Oh, it's implications down here.
Implications. Like what even is that word? You don't see the implications of the small changes in a negative way. When you come to me, it's over 10, 20 years of not so great habit formation that got you there. You're not going to fix it in 6 weeks with me. You might begin to see the glimmer and the sparkle of that new identity you're hoping to form, but it doesn't come right away. And so, I love that he talked a lot about how social media and the news really reinforces that too, results driven.
Yeah, the idea of
implications. I can't stop laughing at that non-word.
Yeah, I mean, it's a leap of faith, right? Things that are good for you that you can't see today. It's a leap of faith that putting away a small amount from every time you get paid will make life so much easier and rewarding at the end of your life. I mean, there's just so many little things that it's just easy to get caught up in the noise and to spin away. One thing that he said, though, that it really spoke to me a lot is, and this is something I try to do when I interview people. He said that there's people that have invisible factors for success. They now have the job, they now have the money, they have the support system around them of an assistant and maybe a publicist and a manager and an agent. And, they own enough real estate to where it's generating money to buy more real estate. And when you interview some people or you hear some people talk, like I saw Stefan Sagmeister speak, who's a critically acclaimed artist designer. And the thing I hated most about his lecture, and the thing that I said I would never do when I speak publicly, and now with the podcast I'll never let myself do it, is he just took so much of his career for granted that he never in his lecture gave anybody the nuts and bolts on how it was put together. And I think that once you get to a certain level, it's just very easy to maybe lie to yourself, or
I think you forget though,
or forget to yourself how hard it was to get to where you're at, and that there's so many factors working for you.
I think it's human nature to
protect yourself. Like, who would want to spend every day in your success remembering the struggle? I mean, I think that there's an element of keeping you humble, but to go back to the podcast series that we did on, is motivation a real thing, and setting priorities, and having my sister call me out with like, hey, that's great, but you're not being relatable. It's not that I didn't have the struggle. I had shit tons of struggle that got me to where I'm at now. A lot that allowed me to get to where I'm at. But you, not only do you forget about it, you also sort of, when you are very public in speaking and sharing your story, whether it's on a website or in a speaking circuit or on a podcast, I think you assume that people know that part of your story, and you think that they only want to hear the good stuff, because we are a results-driven society. People love the fucking success stories. They just do.
But I always think about the guy that I hate the most, not Tom Brady, Jason Mraz. Because Jason,
why do you hate Jason Mraz?
I hate Jason Mraz.
You're so hateful.
Oh,
you're like, not this guy that I hate, this other guy that I hate. As long as I'm just telling you about this other guy that spoke and I hate.
Hey, baby, I pay the rent by having crazy opinions.
You pay half the rent. Let's just be fair where fair is.
Pay my rent.
Okay.
Golly, semantics. So, Jason Mraz.
Yeah.
He's on the Today Show one morning talking about his new album that just came out. Being able to write an album and be a musician as your career, like, that's a fantastic way to be able to live your life. It takes a lot of hard work, takes a bit of luck, a lot of timing, but it's a hard way to get there.
Yeah.
And his advice to everybody at home, and I thought about the guy tying up his work boots with hands that look like sausages because he's been hanging sheetrock for 2 generations. Jason Mraz goes, I took the last year off just to kind of find myself. And I would recommend to everybody at home, like, just take a year off from work. Just take a year to find yourself, because you'll be surprised who you find at the end. And I thought, what an asshole. Like, how to not know your audience and just to take for granted your level of wealth, your level of success, and then to tell people that that's something that everybody should do once.
People need... Yeah, that's just not great advice. Could take a piece of that and use it to your advantage, but maybe he could find a way to speak to people on a more relatable level.
Right. And I think that when you listen to people get interviewed and you listen to people talk, one of the things that I try to avoid my audience ever be able to say is like, well, yeah, it was easy for that guy because of this. I like to break down why it is easy for them and go back to that moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an important thing to remember. I think it's hard to remember, though. It is like... every time I speak about my journey with my health or through my, like, it's hard for me to always remember to explain to people that, like, there was a time I couldn't get off the couch to walk the dog.
I don't know why I'm so tired.
I also don't want to remember that part of myself. Like,
to walk our dog.
Our dog. Semantics.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, like, I understand why it happens. And, and then I also understand, like, we're in a culture of before and after photos where my Instagram feed some days is loaded with, this is what I looked like before I lost. I mean, there's a loaded amount of, a loaded amount of issues in and of itself with the before and after, and sort of setting prioritizing one over the other or glamorizing one over the other. But I'm just speaking to the fact of people not seeing the work when they see that, and the time and the 1% and the tiny curve that he talks so much about. So yeah, I love that he really, really breaks down the importance of that compounding self-interest.
A lot of people have been fascinated in my life when I meet them as an adult, and they're just like, how have you not drank? How have you not done drugs? And then other people that know some of the details on, how I was raised and shit are just amazed that I'm
not a mess.
Not a mess. No, I mean, the thing that a lot of people that really know me or have gotten to know me have, the adjective I hear a lot about me from others is, wow, you must be really strong. You must be really strong to be able to do all this. But for me, it was always about picking the proper crowd to hang out with.
Yes.
And I can still remember all the decisions in life when trouble was brewing to the left, I went to the right, and finding punk rock and skateboarding and straight edge and all the different things that led me into my adult life. It was just one conscious decision after another of these people, this behavior, this lifestyle, it goes to a place. Mm-hmm. And even though I like to watch it on TV and I'm fascinated by the darkness, it's not for me. And so really, I've always been a huge idea of the company you keep says so much about you and who you are. And if I look at all of my friends, everyone I know does something amazing. Like the most responsible person I know in my life who seems the most like 9 to 5 blue collar is a tattoo artist. Okay? Like a tattoo artist is the most reliable, responsible person in my life. Everybody else is out there gambling and hustling every day with a clothing line, opening up an insane boutique, doing something in the world of entertainment. Like everybody I know has this amazing make-believe job. That's not by accident. I know that all of those people rub off on me.
No, I think that's, what he was talking about with environment. I love that when we were first talking about creating a favorable environment that you have control over in the physical sense of your home, your workplace, the drawers at your desk, not having garbage in them.
Oh, so much garbage in my drawers.
I'm talking about like irresponsible, like food, that level of garbage.
Not an abundance of enamel pins and patches and gift cards.
I'm talking about like, if you don't want to, what I was saying to James about, I don't want to eat junk food. I don't want to eat potato chips every day. I don't want to eat candy every day. So what do? I don't keep those things in the house. But when we got to discussing about your work and your physical environment, there's things you can do and you can't do. But I love that he brought it around to your social environment and the importance of, again, casting votes to become the person you want to be through the community and the people that you keep.
100%.
So, his example of going to a CrossFit gym, how it influences the kind of person you become, whether you're conscious of it or not. I think it's really huge. And I agree. I think that having friends that are wildly successful and are putting in the time and the effort to grow their own small businesses and become entrepreneurs and be their own bosses, like it influences you and it fuels you.
I think one of the biggest factors on me really coming to terms with it was time for us to move out of Buffalo, New York. Love the city, love the family, adore the food. But I was finding myself having a hard time being surrounded by people that were like-minded with the same career or aspiration and like-minded in the fact of, I remember one day talking to one of our neighbors in our neighborhood, and I was trying to get our lawnmower started, and the guy walked by and I go, man, I can't wait till one day it's somebody else's job to mow my yard. And he goes, that day's never happening for me. And as he walked,
probably thinking, you don't have kids.
And as he walked off, I was like, man, that's a guy who literally thinks he's going to mow his yard for the rest of his life. For me, I couldn't delegate that to somebody else fast enough. And I'd like to just humble brag, 5.5 years lawnmower free. But
not so humble brag.
But it was that's called irony, Beth. But here's the thing that I was trying to figure out was, will I become this city if I stay here much longer? And 100%, like being able to do a podcast full time, you being a full time food blogger and NTP, like that happens because we put ourselves in a city where the cost of living is so high, where it's do or die. But also, when everyone around you is doing something that feels make believe, it inspires you to be like, why can't I do this too? Like the whole way I even became a freelancer or got into a band, like everything was because I met somebody else that made it feel possible for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we had less friends and less of a social life in Buffalo than I've ever had in my whole life. Like
where you were born and raised, like you had a solid 25 years to put in your time there.
Yeah, I mean, we had friends there, but the longer we spent time there, the more our social circle changed because when you don't have children and you don't have a 9-to-5 job with a boss where you're just going in, putting in the hours, doing the job that just pays the bills, like it's hard to relate to people. And it's very hard to remain motivated to cast the votes to be this person that you believe that, like I look back on my life there and I look back on my life here and I'm really amazed at how much I've accomplished in a short time out here, because so much of it is being surrounded by other people that inspire you to do that. So yeah, I love that he talked so much about that and the importance that it plays, that it isn't just reliant on you becoming this person by, listing out and implementing all of these habits and changes.
Yeah. I want to sit down to eat dinner, not with people that go, man, it's so cool what you do. I mean, every now and again, I want to hear what I do is cool, but I like sitting down for dinner. People are like, how's the business going? What are you doing? And I tell them, they tell me what they're doing. And then like, have you ever thought about this? Or you ever thought about that? Or, oh, I know a guy that you need to meet. This guy I know down in Orange County. He's the guy that blah, 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 blah. Like networking and putting yourself in a moment to succeed is such a big part of it. And, I remember one of the only books, maybe the only book I ever read, was a book called Less Than Zero by Bret Easton Ellis. And it was all about these privileged kids sort of falling apart in Beverly Hills. And I remember reading that and thinking about how different would it be to be the wealthy kids and to have the access to the different things that they have. And so there was a moment in my life where I actively became friends with a lot of the kids that went to the most expensive school in all of Louisville. And it wasn't like I one day just said, where's the school? I'm going to go meet those people. It's just as you made decisions in life, I'm like, oh, you go to collegiate. Oh, that's very cool. And the next thing you know, it just kind of organically happened. But reading that book, it like, you in your mind, you set a destination where you want to go. I'll bring it back to where we're at today. Remember when the guy told us that when the sea turtles are born out there on the beach, that the first time they open their mind.
Nope. The first time they open their eyes.
First time they open their eyes. Thank you.
That turtle's so lit. He's opening his mind on the beach.
Magic mushroom turtles. But the first time the turtle opens his eyes, his mind takes in the image of the stars where he's at.
Yeah, it maps it.
Maps it. And it sets a navigation to where that turtle will come back for the rest of its life. And I think that when you find things you're passionate about, subconsciously, you set that goal of where you want to go. Now, it doesn't always turn out the way that you plan it, but one day you go, man, I always wanted a lake house. I always wanted to live on the water. I live in a house 7 blocks from the Pacific Ocean.
Yeah.
I got there.
Pretty darn awesome.
Pretty darn awesome. But so it's always about picking the things, putting your time into the things that are going to project you where you need to go. And then, as James said, lots of little baby steps to get you there.
Yeah. And casting the vote and, believing that, he talked a lot about that self-awareness. I can't remember the exact terminology that he used, but when he talked about casting votes for the identity of the person that you want to become and already having that self-awareness or that sort of identity that you commit to. I was just talking this morning and I think I shared a post on Instagram about this, that like, this is now my 5th trip here to Mexico. We're literally sitting in the resort in our room in Mexico at the resort that I'm working at for this wellness week.
Watching the sun drop behind the mountains.
That's why we keep talking about Mexico, because we're literally sitting in our room right now recording this wrap up. But I was thinking as we landed here, how this is my 5th trip here. And the very first time I came here was in 2015. And I was here just attending as press for a wellness week. And someone taught the yoga class on the beach. And I was like, that was fun. I can't believe my life has brought me to a place where I'm on the beach taking a yoga class, like looking over the ocean. Like it was so beautiful and serene that I was just like, this is amazing. And then I don't know what came over me, but I came to this moment where I thought, I want to be the person teaching this yoga class on the beach. Like I can do this. Why? I want to do it. And I didn't contact the resort immediately after and say, you should hire me. I just thought, I want to do this someday. And I kind of left it at that. And then I got invited again last fall to come out as press for their wellness week again. And a different teacher was teaching the yoga class. And I thought, I'm going to do this. I'm going to teach this yoga class on the beach. And at the end of the trip, they were like, we'd love to talk. I still, again, didn't go out of my way. I just let them know, like, I'm available to do this kind of work. I'm available to be a yoga teacher. I travel. I teach wellness classes. I'm also a nutritionist, so I could add that to the repertoire of the wellness week. And I just kind of left it at that. But I realized in coming here that it was this sort of belief in me becoming this person that I wanted to be. It was me casting votes. And so it's, I'm kind of veering away from this concept of habits, but you start to believe that you're this type of person. And then you just start to make moves and small steps and small incremental things. And you speak as if you're this person that you believe that you are. And then that's when the doors open and that's when the things change. And that's when 2 years down the road, 3 years down the road, you're living the life that you actually believe that you could.
One of the small steps you made too is you stole that woman's passport.
Correct. And then I changed my name and completely,
So she
literally
couldn't get
changed my identity.
So she couldn't get back, but you could.
Yeah.
No, it's, the small steps. One of the, I'm a real like sort of trying to figure out all the little things to do in my life to get me to where I want to go. Like I have a million bazillion little rules and ticks that almost I think, am I OCD or am I on some sort of weird spectrum? Because most people don't live their life constantly making deals with themselves to get things done. But something that I've given the advice to the audience, and it just always amazes me that more people don't do this, is just run a timer. If you don't want to work, you don't want to do something, just make a deal with yourself.
Yeah.
Sit down, do it for 30 minutes. At the end of the 30 minutes, if it's turning out to be shit and not working out, you tried. You gave your best. It's not right in that moment.
Yep.
But most times you'll find 30 minutes turns into 3 hours. It's just literally brokering that deal with yourself of like, just try a little bit.
Yep.
Because
you're stepping into that identity of what you want.
yes. And it's such a different mindset of like, hey, would you want to go sit over at that desk for 12 hours? No. Would you want to do it for 30 minutes and get up and have a cup of coffee? Yeah, I'll try that.
Yeah.
It's just reprogramming your brain. And that's how I'm able to work so long and create so much work, is that to me, it's just one little piece of the puzzle at a time. I found all this to be just fascinating. Just the idea that all these little pieces just keep putting one brick in the wall. And I think when you look at little pieces, one at a time, that's been the sort of the bit of my personal success, is just breaking it down to the little bit and not putting too much weight into the big stretch, but just thinking of it as each day I'm putting a couple more bricks in the wall.
Yeah. And I also think something that he talked about a lot in this episode is giving yourself the grace when you maybe misstep or step away from the habits that you formed or the identity that you believe that you're a part of, and avoiding the sort of self-judgment and the self-criticism.
Yep.
Whether it's right now in the moment or self-criticizing yourself in the past choices that you made. And, I love his perspective of never miss twice.
Yes.
Because I think it removes that judgment on the action. And, we talk about this a lot on this podcast, and I talk about it a lot with my nutrition clients, that it's not about the perfection. You're not ever going to be perfect in anything that you take on in life. It's near impossible. But what you can do is make the choices that put you in that direction and not label it as good or bad or on or off, or, off track or on track or on the wagon, however you want to perceive it. But I think the logic is just letting yourself have a moment and never missing twice, and just stepping forward and stepping into that space that you've created for yourself.
Yeah, and that idea of once is just a moment of weakness, or just a bad time, or a reward, or however it breaks down to you.
Yeah.
But twice is habit forming.
Yeah.
So it's like if everybody from after work go someplace and you indulge and you eat a bunch of food you're trying not to eat, okay, you did it, you're human, move on, stop feeling sorry for yourself. Yeah. But if next Friday you start thinking like, ooh, can't wait till after work because those guys order those nachos, now you're getting into a bad spot.
Well, and everybody's different in how they, you were saying that people look at you and they think that you have an immense amount of willpower, or however you put it. It's like there are some people that I've talked about this before. It's no longer a motivation for me. It's no longer a negotiation, because I know the alternative. I know that if I had nachos every Friday, it's all kind of coming back around, but maybe after the first nachos, I won't feel bad. Maybe after the second, but what's going to happen after the third and fourth? And then what does that do to my mindset of placing judgment on these actions that, even if you look at it, whether you look at it as a reward or I earn this or indulgence or however, that's for each individual person to decide how they can navigate making these choices. But I think if you ultimately, I call it your why. I like how in this particular episode, he talks a lot about your desired identity. I think whatever it is, when you have a lot of clarity in what you're hoping to accomplish and who you want to be, it makes those tiny choices easier, and it makes those missteps or those side steps or whatever you want to call it just a blip. Because as he said, and he talks about it a lot in the book, where if you look at his analogy in the book is an airplane going from New York to LA, and how in the course of the trajectory of the airplane or the flight, it may not seem like a lot, but at 1%, if they start to shift the trajectory of the flight
tricky
path.
Word.
I'm struggle street today. By the way, I got glutened last night, which is why half
foggy brain.
The flight path at 1%, when you look at it, may seem like nothing, but then over the course of time, it compounds. But there's also the element of, if there's just a small blip in that flight path and it goes right back to its flight path, like everything's fine. It'll end up back at LA where it's supposed to. If it just kind of goes up and goes back down, when you look at it at a percentage or a year path or however you want to break it all down, like it's a blip. It's a nothing moment. as long as it goes back to where it's supposed to be.
It's funny you say that because
Where you want it to be, I should say.
when President Obama was wrapping up his 8-year tenure, Mark Maron asked him on his podcast, like, do you feel like you got a lot done? And Obama said, being the president, well, used to be, it was like steering a ship, and that, you move the wheel just a little bit and that sets it in a different course. But a big giant freighter, like, you can't spin the wheel, you can't turn it around on a dime. Yeah. It's all just made in little bitty increments. And he said, that's the most you can hope as a president, is that you just turn the wheel just a little bit.
I love that.
And I always thought about, like, oh man, that really makes a job that seems so overwhelming not seem so scary. And I think that's part of life, is just taking the thing that scares you, breaking it down, the reverse engineering of all the math of, like, oh, it's really just 10 steps a day for 10 days. And then I can have this thing built that I want.
It's like that third episode of that series that we did, like the small steps. It's the little things.
I thought you were going to talk about a TV show. No. That third episode of that third series, I was like, oh, which one was that? Then I was let down when it was us.
Oh, sad trombone. No, that's kind of what we wrapped up that series. That's why it was so incredible to me that in that time is when I discovered James and his work and read his book after that series. And there was so much that we talked about in that series that after I read his book, I was like, oh my God, like, I was already doing this, or, oh, that's what I was missing. That's the missing piece of the puzzle. So I think it's really cool when you're sort of like unaware that you're doing things in a, I don't want to say correct way, because I don't think there's a right or wrong way, but you don't really know what you're doing. And I said it a lot in the beginning of this podcast, but I was reverse engineering what was working for me because I couldn't necessarily articulate it to my clients or to the audience. And so it was cool to see that somebody else not only could articulate it, but had spent his life researching it.
How has it been for you? I know you're working on your program that you hope to get out next year. That has had to have been, for something that's ambitious, it's had to have been a whole task of literally coming up with a big part of it. Some days I know you just sort of forecast like the big parts, but then it seems like other days, do you just take a hammer and smash it and be like, okay, now here's 100 little parts. How do I reorganize those? Because you're doing something that seems really, really big. And I'd be curious, have you been finding a lot of success in breaking it down into little bite sizes?
Yeah. Because when I first started working with my business coach, really formulating what this program would be and what it was going to look like, it was a gigantic idea with all these moving parts. And she's like, I love it. It's great. Brain dump. Like, first step, we've talked about it on this podcast before, is just brain dump. I dumped everything that I could that was in my brain of what I wanted this program to be down.
Yeah.
And then we organized it out into like an outline. It's an 8-week program. What is the first 4 weeks? What are the second 4 weeks? What are the paths? Because there's going to be all these unique, like, choose your own adventure paths. What's going to be common between the paths? What's going to be unique? And then I started to chip away at it. And I was still like, oh my God, this is huge. It's too much. It's overwhelming. And so then we kind of went back again and took what was in the first 4 weeks and said, okay, how can we navigate this? How can we create this in a more streamlined way, and less is more, but making sure, and like, what is the, not the outcome, the objective. So then we were like, so now that's where I'm at, is I've got a lot of the content started. I've got the sort of overall outline, and now it's like, what's the objective of each of these weeks? And I'm breaking it down even further so that I've got the small pieces. But this is kind of why that series that we did, I mentioned it during that, and with this work with James and his book, like, all of this has been so crucial to me, because I've got all these systems in place with Tasty Yummies and creating content and creating videos, and now I've got systems in place for creating this podcast. Those are easy for me because I've been doing them for so long that there's no negotiations. There's no.
The podcast is easy for you.
Shut up. You know what I'm saying? Like,
it's so many little pieces.
Content creation, though, but that I've got systems for. And that's what he talks about so much, is that, people are afraid of the systems and the habits because they feel like they're going to be not a victim, but they'll be trapped by it and they'll lose their freedom. But it's in the systems and it's in the processes that you find the freedom, because you have more clarity in how you're spending your energy, and you're casting votes for this thing that you want to be or what you're hoping to accomplish. And so it's been really incredible for me to be in this place with my business and really pivoting and trying to create something new, but also like having to break down what I'm doing that's working so that I can look at it and take the pieces of that are working for me and implement it into this whole new system that I'm trying to create, because it's totally different. I don't have systems for it yet. it's overwhelming.
I was busting your balls about the podcast thing because
You busted them so hard they're gone.
yeah, I busted your ovaries. That, the podcast, to get a podcast done, it's so many little bits and pieces and parts because it's audio. It needs to be visual. There needs to be the notes. The recording is just like the smallest part of the whole puzzle. Yeah. And people are always, when I meet people, like, you do 200 of these a year. I'm like, well, it's my job. So if I did less than that, like if I did 10, who would pay for it? But it's all about figuring out a system so that I can get an episode done in 3 hours. And people all the time are like, it would be great. This would be great. If you did this thing, it'd be great. And the way that I always look at that is I pull out a calculator and I go, let's say that took me an hour a day. That's 5 hours a week. That's 250 hours a year. Divide that by 40. Like, that's 6 weeks. Like, that is literally 6 weeks.
Let me get right on that, dude.
Yeah. And it's like, if it's going to be 6 weeks, in my mind, there's a dollar amount of what that should bring in. And it's normally, okay, that would be great. I'd maybe get another 3 comments on Instagram or another 10 followers a month or whatever. But, it's once you start to look at everything as little bits and pieces, then you get really good at knowing what to commit yourself and what not to commit yourself to and how to break it down and figure out, that would be awesome if that exists in the world, but I'm not the guy to do it.
Yeah. And I mean, I wasn't trying to imply that podcasting is easy and that your job is
no.
I
was just talking about things that bunch of little pieces make something.
No. And that's, I guess, my point is that you've been doing this for so long. Like, if somebody asked me to teach them how to blog or how to create content, let's say, and write articles for their website 2 to 3 times a week, I've already got systems in place. So I could teach that to them and they could take from those systems the steps that work for them and implement them. And it would be somewhat easy because it's already figured out. And I'm not saying nobody's ever created a program before, but this program I'm trying to create is so big that there isn't a system.
It's ambitious.
Yet. I'm building the system as I go. And I believe that once it happens, then I'll be able to release a second and a third program because I'll have the systems in place and it'll be effortless in the sense of the small steps will be happening by way of a blueprint that's already been created. But right now I'm creating the blueprint as I go. And it's challenging, but I know it'll be worth it in the end because I'm casting those votes for the person I want to become.
What if somebody said, Beth, can you teach me how to blag?
Stop it. So I feel like, for me, I think 3 questions that I wrote down that I think would be helpful for people when you're at the start of trying to figure out just true behavior change, to James's point, is identity change. Like, first of all, you need to read this book. Everybody needs to read this book because whether you're trying to create habits in your health and wellness goals, or you're trying to create habits for your fitness, or you're trying to create habits surrounding your work-life balance, or becoming an entrepreneur and starting a new business, this book it's brilliant. I haven't read a book this incredible in a long time. And I'm not just saying that because he was my guest today. Literally flew through this book.
You were in love with it before you even knew it was possible to get him on the show or an interview. Like, I remember you just talking about the audiobook before I even came home with a copy of it.
Like jumping around the house. Like, I love this book. It's so good. Anyways, to wrap it up, what I wanted to say was that I think maybe having some clarity in, we've talked about your why before, but I think, to his point, that true behavior change is identity change, and casting votes for the person who you either already are, or acting in alignment with the person you already are, or casting votes for the person you want to become. I think asking yourself, who do you want to be? Or, when we're talking specifically about your health and your wellness, like, how do you want to feel? And then always going back to what is your why? Because I think when you have some clarity in those, then you can sort of break it down further into small, little actionable steps, those 1%, that little bit every day. And then you'll have that clarity to start moving forward.
Yeah.
And then go get his book because
that's your 3 things.
Well, those were my 3 questions are, how do you want to feel? Who do you want to be? And what is your why? And then I was saying, and then go get his book.
Got it.
That's kind of 4 things. But, I hope everybody enjoyed this episode. I think that there's a lot of takeaways from this. And if you enjoy listening to it, it's been awesome for me on social media the last couple of episodes to really see you guys respond to the episodes and to my co-hosts and my guests. And when you share your own opinions on, that last episode with my friend Danielle, so many of you were sharing how you guys felt listening to it. Like, keep that up. I love it. I love sharing what you're going through and when you're listening and what you think about it in my stories and on social media. And as always, we could always use the comments and the reviews over on iTunes or whatever platform you're listening to this on. We love having the reviews and the ratings because it helps us get this out to more people.
Helps it grow, dog.
All right, Mark, thank you for being here for the wrap up this time. We missed you on the last one.
Yeah, and it seemed like it was the most popular episode ever, so maybe we need to do some life math.
Maybe we need to cut you out of this mix. Is that what you're saying?
I'll gladly leave.
Ouch. Wow, with that sinister laugh to boot.
I do have a devil's laugh.
All right, let's go. Let's wrap it up. Thanks for being here, Mark. Thank you, everybody. Until next time, be well.
Bye.